Hello, Jerry here. Welcome back to the Old Testament prophets. We are in the midst of Daniel chapter 3. Now, last week we saw Nebuchadnezzar, how he sponsored an image and then pulled in his leaders from all over the empire. And at least one time they all bowed to this image upon the cue of musicians. We saw in chapter 2 how Nebuchadnezzar came face to face with the power of God, as Daniel gave both the dream content and its interpretation. Nebuchadnezzar gushed about the true God, but evidently that was it. Now we have this image. Is God giving up on Nebuchadnezzar? No. Everybody wonders what the image was. Some say it is of Nebuchadnezzar himself, a possibility. Or it could be the gods Marduk or Nabu. But our conclusion was, and is, we really don't know. Let me add one more possibility from a source I read this week from my library that I respect a lot, the Bible Background Commentary, and this is the volume on the Old Testament. And I hope you don't mind us pursuing this topic a bit more. Now, the authors of this commentary present a view that is in between these two views we've given. That is, the image contained both Nebuchadnezzar and the gods. So let's take this view for a test drive. They write that the king might have taken a cue from the Assyrians, whom the Babylonians conquered. That is, Nebuchadnezzar had a commemorative image made that captured him with the Babylonian gods and perhaps featured his great conquests, so that this would be like a victory or commemorative stela. Now, let me define the word stela in case you're not familiar with this. It is a stone or possibly wooden monument engraved for the public in the ancient world, often featuring the images of leaders with important writing. Anyway, in this view, Nebuchadnezzar's image was on the monument, but not as a god. Rather, he was set in the context of his gods as a mighty hero chosen by the gods for the nation. Now, for instance, let me show you some of these from Assyria. Notice the Assyrian stela of Ashurnasirpal II. The 5 symbols the king is facing represented 5 different important gods of Assyria. Here's Adad-nirari, the 3rd of Assyria, and the text, by the way, mentions King Jehoash of Israel. Again, his attention is on the gods. Our attention is on him, not as a deity, but noting him as a leader close to the gods. There are 3 classes here: the gods, the leader, and the people who look upon the stela, we the commoners. And here's the Assyrian king Esarhaddon. Again, notice that attention to the gods is given, his focus. And at his feet are defeated prisoners of war. Can you see them there? One is on his knees with a noose around his neck. The gods were giving victory to the nation through this devoted hero king. Now, this Old Testament commentary noted that there is some evidence that people would leave offerings of devotion at these monuments. The commentary writes, in this way the king is given the honors that are generally given to the gods, but by personally distancing himself, he avoided making himself equal to the gods. Such rituals were used as occasions for provincial territories to take a loyalty oath. End quote. And that's what we said last week, that this might have been a kind of loyalty oath. So the worshipful bow would not have been for his deity. He wasn't a god, but they were bowing to this whole scenario, the blessed reality of the nation in harmony with the gods, through this mighty warrior king. And their worship of this image attests and affirms They are believing and supporting that whole state of the nation, the gods, the king, and his political, social, and military programs. So let me state it again and try and crystallize this. This would be a bow and worship not just of the Babylonian gods, but an affirmation of every leader's belief and support for the whole Babylonian system as led by the king. It was firmly connecting the king with the established religious, political, military, and social order. In a sense, it would have been kind of a worship of the Babylonian nation itself at the time, led by the gods through their chosen king. There was no room here to hold to the Babylonian gods, but not also to the king. So those who would not bow and worship to the gods with their king showed themselves to be the worst traitors. They would be executed in a way that left almost no remains, that is, through the fiery furnace. Their physical existence would be removed from the land. Remember, this was for all the leaders of Babylon. To be a leader in the nation, you have to be on board with the nation. The many captive peoples Babylon now occupied could hardly be expected to be enthusiastically in support of Babylonia. And one could hardly expect any of these captive peoples to ever become leaders in the Babylonian system. How in the world could that happen? But that's exactly what did happen with Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Very unique. And so now, 3 of them were caught in this very unique test of loyalty. So this third view in this commentary would help explain some questions. First, the image proportions being 10:1 would be fine. That is, 90 feet high, 9 feet wide, because there would need to be room for all the symbols of the gods and the king facing them and whatever other symbols. And it would help explain how Nebuchadnezzar could be on a worshipped image without claiming to be a god. And it might explain why the image was not named in the Bible as either Nebuchadnezzar or as a particular god, because it would have been a kind of conglomerate, a mix of both. This would also explain why faithful Jews would not bow to this kind of image, because they would not admit of the Babylonian gods, nor would they celebrate the triumphs of Nebuchadnezzar, Judah herself being one of the victims. Now, since human nature has not changed, if the Assyrians did this, and possibly Nebuchadnezzar, then other powerful rulers will certainly find ways to get as close to worship as possible, to be associated with the divine, in order to enjoy a more complete and enthusiastic support. Check out this painting by K. Stauber during the rise of Hitler in Germany. Robert Jones wrote, "This painting was produced on everything from matchbooks to postcards and distributed throughout Germany. A fearless Hitler, in the forefront of massed party members, is mantled by sunlight from the heavens. The dove descending on him connects him religiously to the baptism of Jesus Christ by John the Baptist." The caption reads, "Es lebe Deutschland," Germany lives, or long live Germany. Hitler here is bigger than life. Behind him, and much smaller, are the vast throngs following him. Destiny, God, or fate is behind him as he leads Germany to a utopian, glorious future. See that divine favor on top of him, and maybe that's what Nebuchadnezzar was conveying in his image. Now, Napoleon did the same. In July 1801, he signed an agreement with Pope Pius VII, re-establishing good relations between the French government and the French Catholic Church. and the Catholics as the majority church in France. Now, as you might know, the French Revolution turned against religion, including the Catholic Church in France, closing many doors. But Napoleon was smarter than that. He wanted the support of the millions of devout French Catholics. And here in this painting, he was signing this agreement. Now, remember this painting. Now notice how Napoleon had this event painted. Wow, big difference. I'm sorry that in all Napoleon's nervousness and anticipation of the big coronation, he forgot to get dressed. But the show must go on, I guess. Notice Mary, the mother of Jesus, centered on top, overseeing. The angels, the enthusiastic approval of the cardinal, robed in red. The Pope accepting this with respect, though his expression is a little hard to read. A Pentecostal fire lit above Napoleon's head. True blessing and power and direction from heaven. Actually, from the right hand of Mary, who holds the fire. Do you see that? But even in this moment of exaltation, Napoleon is moved. He's looking down with compassion and understanding at a lower clergyman. Yes, he will ever be mindful of the lower classes. Napoleon's war helmet and his sword are at his feet for now, and a woman lays a crown on his head. Now, the French were never going to worship humans, and certainly not after the French Revolution. But Napoleon romanticized this 1801 agreement with the Pope in such a way as to put himself within the perfect divine workings of heaven as a great hero. Hitler and Napoleon wanted to be seen as heroic, divinely chosen saviors for their nations, though not deities. And maybe that's what Nebuchadnezzar wanted to accomplish with the image. Or maybe not. In the end, we still don't know for sure what the image was. Now, here comes the accusation in our story. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods, or worship the golden image that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar can get really angry. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall be immediately cast into the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Well, here is admirable restraint. In the decree there was no second chance. One's feet hardly touched the ground on the way to execution. But for these high-ranking leaders, he gives a chance to demonstrate loyalty. But then Nebuchadnezzar, in kingly fashion, adds that last sentence, and who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? You know, how often it's our last juicy words we choose to say that get us in the most trouble. An interesting choice of words here. What God, that is, divine, exalted being, what God could intervene and save you from me, that is, a human being, said with such 100% certainty. All the gods he reverenced were on his side, he believed. Oh, but wait. Have you forgotten, O king, that however many years ago you prostrated yourself before Belteshazzar, Daniel, a Jewish captive, and you said, "Truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery." And now you face 3 more Jewish captives who claimed their God, that is, the same God as Daniel talked about, could deliver them. Now the king knew these 3 men were Jews because the accusers said so. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." Now, could that be worded any better? Remember, God promises to give those in persecution the words to say and the grace to say them in times of persecution. Catch the resolute calmness in this reply, not spoken arrogantly or disrespectfully, but yet firmly. God can deliver us if he chooses to do so. But if he chooses not to, one thing's certain, we will serve him, not your gods, and not this image. This has to be one of the most noble and clear examples of persons resigned to do the will of God in a life or death situation. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it usually was heated. Now, we thought Nebuchadnezzar was already angry. No, that was just his entry level. Now he's filled with fury, and his expression changed. How the court must have been on edge as this powerful king flew into this rage, and out comes his first order: heat the furnace 7 times hotter. That is, throw 7 times as much fuel in, and increase those external bellows that fanned the coals. Hot Nebuchadnezzar, hot furnace. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. I don't imagine many minutes before this urgent order was carried out. The king has erupted like a volcano, and everyone was in a hurry to fulfill everything he said. His execution furnace had visibility in the front. Well, of course it did, so all could witness the horror and never went to go against the king. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." And he answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." The king's rage has now suddenly shifted to astonishment, and that was a lot of rage to dispel. The 3 men were walking around. That is, their ropes burned off and they had freedom of movement, but were walking through the fire and coals. So the Lord not only delivered them, but he chose to walk with them in the furnace. What does that say about the Lord? And there was a fourth person with them, someone that the king named as a son of the gods. That is, there's something divine about that person. As the three said, their God was able to deliver them. They weren't sure he would, but he could, and he did. Though we probably know this story, here's where we should be astonished again. It's a wonder that furnace didn't burn up. Was it built to withstand 7 times as much heat? Maybe even God kept that furnace intact. We don't know. We're told by experts that ancient metal working furnaces could exceed 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the temperature that some rocks and minerals melt. However hot they could make it, it was no problem for God to shield his 3 servants from even the smell of the furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. And the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Well, complete protection here. An astounding miracle. And in the sovereignty of God, lots of people were there to witness the miracle. Nebuchadnezzar answers his own taunting question. "And who is the God that can deliver you from my hands?" he had said. Now the king says, Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Well, I'll say this about Nebuchadnezzar. He's a character for sure. Don't get him mad. But when he is shown to be wrong, he admits it, unlike the Pharaoh against Moses, who just kept denying and refusing. The early church was also persecuted fiercely at times. And what story did some of them think about in that fiery first century? Yes, the 3 faithful Jews. In ancient Rome, it was against the law to bury people within city limits. So outside the city, along the main road, there are various catacombs or underground burial places. I've seen some of these. In the Priscilla catacombs, there is this artwork by an unknown Christian, dated between AD 250 and 300, doing his or her best to portray how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego looked in the 6th century BC. And there they were in their fiery trial also. But notice the Holy Spirit, the dove, the comforter, the helper, God's presence with them. And look at their hands. They were praying and maybe even praising God as they realized his deliverance. He was with them in the 1st century fire, the 6th century BC fire. And so he is ever with us in the 21st century. Jesus, the same yesterday, today, and forever. He'll never leave or forsake us. God sustained them for many reasons, but one was that they could be this witness to the living God to the many there, and to provide another story for the rest of the Jews in exile to inspire and encourage them in Babylon. They don't have to compromise their faith. Stay true. Now, 2 weeks ago, I spent 2 days on the University of Notre Dame campus in Indiana, studying and learning their campus. One of the banners hanging from their lampposts contained a profound statement from one of their presidents, probably spoken at a graduation. Together we are Notre Dame. Together let us be the Notre Dame the world needs. That's a great statement. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were being the God-empowered people that Babylon needed to see, and the faithful followers that the Jewish nation needed to hear about. And so they took their place among the faithful examples for us as well, listed in Hebrews chapter 11, who through faith conquered kingdoms, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire. Next week, Lord willing, we will push on to chapter 4, which features a guest writer. If you can believe, Nebuchadnezzar writes for us the next chapter. 'Tis true. Thanks very much.